I was first elected in 2004 and, as was said, was re-elected in 2009 along with Nicky Sinclair. We were both elected on the UKIP ticket because we came second. UKIP came second across the country in nearly every constituency, but we came second overall. And we came first in some very odd places, Newcastle-under-Lyme and Walsall and various other places. We actually came first in 2009, so we did really well. We got 13 MEPs elected and sat together in the European Parliament, and generally speaking we vote no to legislation on the basis that it shouldn't be legislated from there anyway. They've got no right to legislate on British affairs. It all should be done in Westminster by MEPs. Why? Because if it's done by MEPs and they get it right, you can vote for them, and if they get it wrong you can vote against them. But in Brussels and Strasbourg you don't get that chance, because you don't know who is bringing forward the bill, you don't know who's voted for it or who hasn't, and most of them you can't vote for anyway because they're Polish, they're Hungarian, they're Czech, they're all sorts of things that you'll never get involved with in your life. So there's no way that it's democratic, and it's hopeless to try and find out who actually imposed the legislation upon you. The first week I was there in the Parliament, Mr. Barroso, who is the President of the Commission, announced that the First World War was a civil war. They're obviously rewriting history, and it's in their imagination that the First World War was a civil war. I did a sign which said I wanted to speak, and banged my little button, and I was amazed to find I was on air. And I said, both my grandfathers were in the First World War. Nobody told them it was a civil war. What were the Canadians doing there? What were the New Zealanders doing there? What were the Australians doing there? And before I could get through the words, what were the United States doing there, I was cut off and told to sit down. So we all had to listen to more of this stuff from Mr. Barroso, who is actually a Portuguese Maoist, President of the European Commission, former Portuguese Maoist. He said there were no Germans in the Second World War. And we were sort of sliding under the seats, trying to control ourselves from getting up and throwing something or whatever. And then he obligingly told us that they weren't Germans, they were Nazis. I went back to my hotel that evening and thought about that, and really that's an insult to Germans who died in the Second World War who weren't Nazis, because there were a lot of good Germans died in the Second World War. They were not the Gestapo, they weren't the SS. They were just ordinary people who were told they had to fight for the country. But now, apparently, all of those people are now branded Nazis. Why? Because they want to erase the fact that the Germans were fighting in the Second World War. Anyway, that was the first week in the Parliament. We've had clashes all the time in that Parliament as the years have gone by. Recently, I'm also on the Transport Committee, incidentally. Each MEP can get himself on or herself onto a committee, and I decided I'd join the Transport Committee because, amongst other things that I've done, I'm a chartered surveyor, by the way, dealing with commercial property, but for 7 years I was property manager, group property manager for Quinton Hazel Limited at Leamington Spa, and we had about 350 properties throughout the country at that time, including Parkco and Standard Motorist Centres and all the rest of it. But I chose the Transport Committee, and I have to sit through endless talk about how to design tractors and how the European Parliament will prescribe various things that everybody has to adhere to. And it seems to me that it stifles any kind of improvement. Any entrepreneur who comes onto the scene wanting to design a new kind of vacuum cleaner, for example, will be stifled by the regulations, because what he's talking about doesn't exist and won't be recognised by them. So it's no wonder that Dyson goes out of the country to do what he wants to do, and it's no wonder other things are happening outside of the EU, because it can't happen within it because of the regulations. I'll give you some examples of that. I've had quite a few in my time, and these are some of the things that I get in the mail. Only in July, I was in a transport meeting and they were talking about zero tolerance to alcohol on driving. That's what they're trying to do at the moment. They're trying to stop anybody having any trace of alcohol in their systems when they're stopped by the police. And that isn't actually possible because your system actually creates a degree of alcohol whether you've been drinking or not. So they need a bit of education on that. But would you believe somebody raised the issue of wine gums? And they spent half an hour talking about wine gums. And I wanted to stand up and say, look, there's no alcohol in wine gums. What are you on? But I didn't. Why didn't I? Because I thought if I said that and said there's no alcohol in wine gums, they would claim what that was a misdescription and we couldn't call them wine gums. So, I don't want to be the person who stops wine gums because of the European Parliament finding out there's no wine in them. However, they went rabbiting on about this and eventually formed a subcommittee to report back at the next transport meeting on the amount of alcohol in wine gums. But these people are there basically to draw money, to get their £500 a day or whatever it is in order to sit on that committee. And you'll find that they'll talk about nearly anything. And I think a lot of this legislation that they're generating, and there is too much of it, the European Parliament have made more legislation for us in this country than the Westminster Parliament have made since 1485 and the Battle of Bosworth Field. They've poured it out. We've only been in 30 years and they've made more legislation than our government have made for hundreds of years. It makes no sense. And some poor devil down in, as you already said, down in Westminster has to go through this, and as you rightly say, gold plate some of it as well. God bless them. And what a waste of time that is.